I guess we can record. Thank you. So welcome everybody who's come on since the prayer began. I would like to start tonight by saying I want to change the modus operandi of the course a little bit tonight. I have no stomach for being a policeman. So what I'm going to suggest we do is not have raised hands during the class. That I would ask that if you have questions or comments, you put them in the chat in as succinct a way as you can. And then as we progress, if there's a natural break in the material, I'll then turn my attention to the chat questions and then deal with them. And then what I'm really hoping to achieve is to get through all the material that I want each night and then open up the discussion to everyone at the end. So it might be 20 minutes, might be half an hour, something like that. That's my goal. So there will be plenty of opportunity for you to interact, but I think it just makes more sense to treat this as a university lecture for the first 2/3 or whatever, because that's how I've actually presented. You know, I was trying to do a hybrid thing, but it really doesn't work very well, I don't think. So anyway, so if, you know, if a comment or something occurs to you in the middle of the class, you could just jot it down and then put it up at some point when it's convenient to you, when you're not distracted. Okay, so let's start with number 6, class number 6 on religious evolution. So most of the world's religious traditions divided their teachings into 2 broad areas, often called exoteric and esoteric. The exoteric, with an X, were the outer teachings meant for the masses and the ordinary people. It normally consisted of a series of tales, usually in mythic form, according to Wilbur. It was believed that those who believed them would live forever in a heaven with that tradition's ultimate being or god or goddess. The esoteric traditions were the inner teachings or the secret teachings, usually kept from the public, open only to individuals of exceptional quality and character. These didn't teach mythic stories and beliefs. Rather, they were psychotechnologies of consciousness transformation. By performing the specific practices and exercises, an individual could reach an actual awakening to his or her own true nature, gaining a great liberation and ultimate freedom from the terror-inducing limitations of ordinary life and a direct introduction to ultimate reality. This great liberation was known by various names: enlightenment, awakening, moksha, kensho, satori, metamorphosis, emancipation, and salvation. In all cases, it was said to be the discovery of the timeless and eternal, the spaceless and infinite, the unborn and undying, the unlimited and unfettered, the one and only, ultimate reality itself. So let's look at a couple of examples of these esoteric schools of thought. Zen Buddhism has been training individuals to discover their own Buddha nature since the 6th century Common Era, when it was brought to China from India by Bodhidharma. Tibetan Buddhism, also known as Vajrayana Buddhism, whose most famous follower at the moment is the Dalai Lama, was brought to Tibet in the 8th century by Padmasambhava and is still going strong, despite being forced out of its home country by China. Vedantic Hinduism, one of the most sophisticated and philosophically astute of the great paths of liberation, is alive and well in India. And numerous contemplative schools exist in the West, Jewish Kabbalah, Christian contemplation, and Islamic Sufism are all passing on the knowledge that leads to liberation. Together, they constitute a great, even extraordinary treasure of human history. So why are religions becoming less influential? As we have all seen, all the religions in both their exoteric and esoteric forms are becoming less and less influential in the modern and postmodern world. Wilber believes that one reason for this is that the only religion the West is generally familiar with is the exoteric or outer mythic type religion. This retains much of the often childish qualities of the age that produced it, which becomes more and more embarrassing to modern men and women, silly even, as they mature. So did I see Robert White? He was on a while, but I don't see him now. Okay, so let's ask Meryl if she would read our first reading, which I'll just bring up now. There we go.
Moses really did part the Red Sea. God really rained locusts down on the Egyptians. Elijah really rose straight to heaven in his chariot while still alive. We're supposed to believe that stuff. It's not exactly an easy sell in today's world, given that the same essential worldview can be produced by any given 5-year-old child.
So I think he might be going a little over the top here, but he's dismissing these ideas in the way that many intellectuals would do nowadays. So the second reason in Wilber's view is that in the 1,000 to 2,000 years since these great traditions were first created, and those fundamental forms have not substantially changed since that time, there has been an extraordinary number of new truths learned about human nature, about the mind, the emotions, awareness, consciousness, and especially the growth and development of human traits and qualities. And that's not to mention the explosion of knowledge related to brain chemistry and its functioning, things that the ancients simply had no way of knowing, and so did not include them in their otherwise impressive meditative systems. So here's a question for you. Does enlightenment change over time? Now, what if all that we have learned in the past 1,000 years, even the past 50 years, actually affected how, for example, a person directly experiences enlightenment or awakening? What if we have discovered aspects of human awareness that definitely determine how humans interpret the experiences they have? And what if these interpretive frameworks, which determine the way humans directly experience enlightenment, not only exist, but actually grow and develop through more than half a dozen well-documented stages during a person's lifetime, and that they continue to develop during a human's adult life? Nina, how would you like to read the second one for us? Are you able to see it on your cell phone? Or is it too small?
You're muted, Nina.
No, I can't see it on my cell phone. Sorry.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's all right. No problem.
Tonight. Sorry about that. Sorry.
No problem.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I saw Kim come on. Kim Smiley,
Yep,
are you available?
I'm here. Awakening or enlightenment is traditionally taken as being the unity of the individual self with ultimate reality, what the Sufis call the supreme identity, resulting in a wholeness or non-duality, which, including all of reality, conveys a sense of utter freedom and total fullness to the individual. But what if these interpretive frameworks actually govern how individuals see and experience wholeness, and thus directly determine how an individual experiences enlightenment itself. That would change the nature of the paths of the great liberation profoundly, with, in effect, a different liberation being experienced at each of these different stages of growth and development.
Okay, thank you. So the good news is that the evidence is already in. These framework stages definitely do exist. In fact, they have been found in more than 40 countries in every culture checked so far. And they definitely alter how one experiences enlightenment or any other experience for that matter. As Wilbur puts it, the very ground has shifted under the great traditions and they don't even know it. So the next section is religion's need to incorporate modern and postmodern facts. Wilbur maintains that all of the world's religions need to incorporate the facts discovered by modern and postmodern thinkers in their worldviews. I would certainly include the Baha'i faith in this group. He offers his recommendations in all humility as suggestions to be considered honestly, not commands to be taken unreservedly. He is not suggesting that religions throw out any of their accepted truths, dharmas, or gospels. Instead, he encourages the religions to add some of the facts he presents to their overall teachings. None of what he describes is meant to threaten their essential truths. They are meant as supplements that might be included in any of the major traditions. So the failure to include these new facts increases the irrelevance of the religions. If the religions of the world fail to include the wide range of facts uncovered by modern and postmodern thinkers, the spiritual traditions will look more and more dated, outmoded, and archaic. Consequently, they will continue to lose members. Wilbur points out that only 11% of Northern Europe's population is churched. In other words, only 1 out of 10 people have anything to do with institutional religion. 9 out of 10 find it unbelievable and useless. At the same time, there is a growing number of people who feel deeply spiritual but do not feel moved by any of the great traditions. They identify themselves as spiritual but not religious, or SBNR for short. Eva, are you in St. Lucia? Are you able to see the screen?
I don't see Eva. She was here,
Oh,
but where did she go?
okay.
Oh,
Well,
you're there, Eva. There you are. She's away from her desk at the moment.
okay. Well, how about you then, Linda? Would you like to read 3 for us?
Absolutely, yes. Reading number 3. Polls show that some 20% of Americans identify overall with that phrase. Could you repeat the phrase?
Oh, spiritual but not religious.
Right. Sorry. And some polls have shown that in the younger generation, those between 18 and 29, this percentage explodes to an astonishing 75%. In other words, 3 out of 4 young individuals have a deep spiritual yearning that no existing religion is addressing. And I believe, and there's already a significant amount of evidence supporting this claim, that a more truly integral spirituality speaks compellingly to this demographic. Ken Wilber, The Religion of Tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure all of us in the room would feel that the Baha'i faith would fit the bill in terms of addressing that yearning if they would ever be contacted by a Baha'i. So, how are the 3 turnings in Buddhism related? So before we dive into the details of what Wilbur is here calling integral spirituality, I believe it would be useful to revisit the 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma in Buddhism, this time relying on Ken Wilber's mastery of the English language to clarify this intimidating topic. In addition, this will help us to see how his idea of a 4th turning relates to the three prior historical developments. So in Wilber's view of the relationships between the three turnings, the Madhyamaka school of the second turning was critical of early Buddhism in many ways, but included its foundational teachings, while transcending those notions it finds partial, limited, or incomplete. He sees the Yogacara school of the third turning applying a similar strategy to both the first and second turnings. In essence, he believes that Yogacara was attempting to integrate and synthesize all three of the turnings. This three-stage synthesizing unfolding is evidence of the evolutionary nature of Buddhism itself, that the relationship or that the religion was plugged into the great evolution of spirit itself. So that's progressive revelation within a religion, which is not a topic that we talk about very much, but I think it's relevant to every single religion. You can trace their development. So many adherents of Buddhism have a view that Buddhism itself was unfolding, with each new turning adding something new and important to the overall Buddhist teaching itself. Harold, are you available for this next item, number 4?
Yes. Many contemporary Buddhist teachers, agreeing with psychologists and sociologists that the world itself, at least in several important ways, is undergoing a global transformation, believe that this transformation will affect also Buddhism, adding to it yet newer and more significant truths, and resulting in yet another unfolding, a fourth great turning of Buddhism itself.
Thank you. So as Wilber sees it, such a fourth turning will retain all the previous great truths of Buddhism, but will also add newer findings from fields as diverse as evolutionary biology and developmental psychology, but only to the extent that they are in fundamental agreement with the central tenets of Buddhism itself, simply extending them, so to speak. This fourth turning is known by various names, such as evolutionary Buddhism or integral Buddhism. And it transcends and includes all of its predecessors, adding new material while retaining the essentials. Wilber believes that this new turning is completely in keeping with the general understanding Buddhism has of itself, that Buddha Dharma, or Buddhist truth, is itself unfolding, growing, and evolving, responding to new circumstances and discoveries as it does so. Even the Dalai Lama has said, for example, that Buddhism must keep pace with modern science or it will grow old and obsolete. Okay, so I want to go through a brief review of the three turnings. Original Buddhism in turning 1 was founded on such ideas as the difference between samsara, the source of suffering, and nirvana, the source of enlightenment or awakening. Also, the three marks of samsaric existence, suffering, impermanence, and no self, as well as the four noble truths. What are they? Life as lived in samsara is suffering. The cause of this suffering is craving or grasping. Number 3, to end craving or grasping is to end suffering. And 4, there is a way to end grasping, namely the Eightfold Way or path, which includes right view, right intention, right speech, right actions, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right unitive consciousness. The ultimate goal of early Buddhism was to escape samsara, the manifest realm of life, death, rebirth, old age, suffering, and sickness. To escape it entirely by following the Eightfold Path and attaining nirvana. Nirvana means essentially formless extinction. The prefix nir means without, and yana or vana, sorry, means everything from desire to grasping to lust to craving itself. So the overall meaning is blown out or extinguished, as if a lit candle was handed to you and you leaned over and blew out the flame. Okay, let's find out. Jennifer doesn't want to read tonight, I don't think, but how about Linda O'Neill?
Okay, sure.
Number 5.
What is extinguished or blown out? All the typical marks of samsara itself, including suffering, the angst that comes from craving for permanence, the separate self-sense or self-contradiction, often called ego, and its inherent fear, anxiety, and depression. The state of nirvana is sometimes said to be a state similar to deep dreamless sleep, in which, of course, there is no ego, no suffering, no hankering for permanence, no space, no time, no separation. If anything, there is simply the boundless peace or vast equanimity of being liberated from the torture of samsara and its suffering-inducing ways. The goal is clear. Get out of samsara and into nirvana. Ken Wilber, The Religion of Tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Very clear. So that was the basic form of Buddhism as practiced for almost 800 years, until Nagarjuna began paying attention to the duality between samsara and nirvana. Nagarjuna felt that this duality tore reality in half and did not produce liberation, but rather subtle illusion. For him, there was no ontological difference between samsara or nirvana. The difference was merely epistemological. In other words, reality looked at through concepts and categories appears as samsara, while the very same reality looked at free from concepts and categories is nirvana. Same reality, different point of view. Samsara and nirvana are thus not two or non-dual. They're the same thing, looked at from different points of view. This idea caused a major revolution in Buddhist thought and practice. Mr. Oak, could you read 6 for us?
Sure. Excuse me. Gautama Buddha had discovered the emptiness or ultimately illusory nature of the separate self-sense, but had not discovered the emptiness, the shunyata of all of what is usually called reality, including not only all subjects or selves, but all objects or dharmas. Buddhism had just taken its second major turn in this illustrious history, adding a novel and profound element to its already accepted discoveries.
Interesting that he praises him for as far as he went, where he was noticing the emptiness of the self, but he wasn't going all the way to the point where he was recognizing the emptiness of all things. So Nagarjuna relies on the two truths doctrine. There is a relative or conventional truth, and there is an absolute or ultimate truth. Relative truth can be categorized and characterized, and is the basis of disciplines such as science, history, law, and so on. This is the realm of samsara. Reality looked at through concepts and categories. Ultimate truth, on the other hand, cannot be categorized at all. It is completely free of concepts and categories. You can't say, for instance, that ultimate reality is being. You can't say it's not being, or both, or neither. The same is true of any category or quality. So why is this? Because any concept you come up with makes sense only in terms of its opposite, infinite versus finite. something versus nothing, pleasure versus pain, temporal versus timeless, good versus evil, truth versus falsity, etc. Ultimate reality has no opposite. As Nagarjuna says, it is neither void nor not void, nor both nor neither. But in order to point it out, it is called the void. This is shunyata, or emptiness. What this means is that emptiness, or ultimate reality, is not separate from anything that is arising. Emptiness is therefore not a realm separate from other realms. It is the emptiness or transparency of all realms. In fact, emptiness is the reality of each and everything in the manifest and unmanifest world. It is their very suchness, their thusness, their isness, as they call it in Buddhism. So looked at through concepts and categories, the universe appears as samsara. But looked at without concepts and categories, the world of samsara is actually self-liberated nirvana. Emptiness can be found anywhere in the world of form. Any and all form is one with emptiness. It is not a particular state of mind or state of consciousness, but the very fabric or isness of consciousness itself. These are very challenging ideas even now. Most people wouldn't know what you're talking about when you come to this level of conversation. So a commonly used metaphor to explain the relationship of emptiness to form is the ocean and its waves. Typical limited states of consciousness, like looking at a mountain, to experiencing happiness, to feeling fear, to watching a bird in flight, or to listening to music, all are partial states and thus separate from each other. They all have a beginning or are born and have an ending or die. They are like the individual waves in the ocean. Each starts, has a certain size, small, medium to large, and eventually dies. Plus, they are all different from one another. Mary, are you interested in reading tonight, or would you like to pass on that?
Thank you. Could you please pass?
Okay, no
Thank you.
problem.
Thanks a lot.
How about Hangame then?
For
Number
sure.
7, I'll just bring it up a little bit more. There you go.
But emptiness, the reality of each moment, its sheer transparent being, its simple suchness, or thusness, or isness, is like the wetness of the ocean. And no wave is wetter than another. One wave can certainly be bigger than another, but it is not wetter. All waves are equally wet. All waves are equally emptiness, or equally spirit, or equally Godhead, or Brahman or Tao. And that means that the very nature of this and every moment, just as it is pure spirit. Spirit is not hard to reach, but is impossible to avoid.
That's a very dramatic passage, I think. That really hits home to me. It's just that we don't have the capacity to see it that way. That's something that we have to train ourselves to do. Okay, so that means that whatever state of mind you have right here, right now, is equally enlightened. You can no more attain enlightenment than you can attain your feet. Enlightenment, and the big mind, big heart that reveals it, is absolutely ever-present presence. All you have to do is recognize it. The good news in all of this is that you no longer have to retreat to a monastery, away from the world, away from form, away from samsara, in order to find liberation. Samsara and nirvana have been joined, united, brought together in a single or non-dual reality. The goal is no longer to become the isolated saint or arhat, looking to get out of samsara entirely, but the socially and environmentally engaged bodhisattva, which means literally being of enlightened mind, whose vow, you will remember, is not to get out of samsara and retreat into an isolated nirvana, but a promise to fully embrace samsara and a vow to gain enlightenment as quickly as possible in order to help all sentient beings recognize their own deepest spiritual reality, or their Buddha nature, and hence their enlightenment. This Madhyamika notion of emptiness became the foundation of virtually every Mahayana and Vajrayana school of Buddhism. Very important. So now we get to turning number 3. But that's not to say that questions still didn't remain. Granted that the absolute can't be literally categorized in dualistic terms and concepts, is there really nothing whatsoever that could be said at all about it? At least in the realm of conventional truth, couldn't more systems, maps, and models be offered about reality and how to realize it? The answer, according to such brilliant treatises as the Lankavatara Sutra, was a resounding yes. The Yogacara school was founded in the 4th century of the Common Era by the brilliant half-brothers Asanga and Vasubandhu. Asanga was more of a creative and original thinker, while Vasubandhu was a gifted systematizer. Together they initiated or elaborated most of the tenets of what came to be known as the Yogacara school, which means the practice of yoga, or the Chittamatra, the nature of mind only school of Buddhism. This was another evolutionary step forward, the 3rd great turning of the wheel of Dharma. Although most Yogacharans insist that the end state of Madhyamaka is the same as it is in Yogacara, there is an unmistakably more positive tone to the Yogacara in both the concept of the nature of mind, but also in how non-duality is conceived. For Madhyamaka, non-duality is virtually an utter blank, at least from the perspective of the mind's conceptions. That blankness is actually seeing reality exactly as it is, in its suchness or thusness, but without names, concepts, categories, or prejudices. While Yogacara doesn't disagree with this, it sees emptiness and non-duality more positively. It stresses the absence of duality between perceiving subjects and the perceived object. This allows for the radiance or luminosity of emptiness to be better recognized in the very midst of manifestation. From this point of view, it's not phenomena that are illusory or suffering-inducing, but seeing phenomena as objects, as items set apart from awareness, or the subject and object existing as separate entities somewhere out there. Therefore, Yogacara is able to unify emptiness in form in an even stronger way than Madhyamaka was able to do. So here's a comment of Wilbur's that will hopefully make it clearer. Zilda, could you read 8 for us?
Sure. When emptiness and form are truly seen to be one, then form itself is seen as the radiance and luminosity of emptiness. And all of reality becomes a rainbow of luminous transparency, whole and complete, free and full, a realm of joy and celebration. The union of emptiness and form become the union of emptiness and luminosity, and playing with radiant luminosity in the form of our own immediate presence and brilliant clarity becomes a direct daily occurrence.
If I could be so bold, I'd like to say, from a Baha'i perspective, this is what seeing with the eye of God would look like. Okay, so you see the luminosity, you see the divine attributes arrayed around you in all the manifest reality. Thank you, Zilda. So I want to talk about a turning 3A or 4, which is Tantra. All of this had a direct hand in the creation of Tantra and its close cousin, Vajrayana Buddhism. Wilbur refers to Tantra as the real flowering of the third great turning. A few Buddhists count Tantra as a fourth turning, but this is not widely accepted. Tantra was especially developed at the great Nalanda University in Bihar, India, from the 8th to the 11th centuries of the Common Era. So here's what's left of it today. It's a massive structure. That's just one of its walls. For Tantra, what early Buddhism and most other religions considered sins, poisons, or defilements were actually, precisely because of the union of emptiness and form, the seeds of great transcendental wisdom. The poison of anger, for instance, instead of being denied, uprooted, or repressed, as in so many other spiritual approaches, is rather entered directly with non-dual awareness, whereupon it discloses its core wisdom, that of pure, brilliant clarity. Passion, when entered and embraced with non-dual awareness, transmutes itself into universal compassion, and so on. Jack, are you available for number 9?
Yep. Thus, in tantric initiations, it was common to use the 5 M's, 5 items that most religions consider totally sinful, such as alcohol, meat, and sex, and directly introduce them in the initiation ceremony in order to emphasize that all things without exception are ornaments of and fully one with spirit itself. This non-dual realization applies as well to all of our own quote unquote sinful qualities, all of our feelings, thoughts, and actions, no matter how apparently negative, are at heart nothing other than Godhead or non-dual spirit, and are to be seen and experienced exactly as such.
Okay, so here are the 5 M's. Wine, meat, fish. Oh, that's not fish. I made a mistake here. Mudra is, it's a gesture. It's a hand gesture, but it's not. Sorry, I've forgotten what it is. And then sexual intercourse. I'm going to have to fix that one, obviously. Anyway, you get the idea that by stepping into each of these with the non-dual awareness, you get to see its true character. So this other graphic here is a list of the 3 ways of Buddhism. The first turning, as we saw, was the way of renunciation. You're renouncing the world and going off and attempting to get into nirvana. You're denying negative states as part of despised samsara. In the second turning, it's the way of transformation. You're working on a negative state with wisdom until it converted to a positive transcendental state. The third turning, and specifically including Tantra, is the way of transmutation, looking directly into a negative state of form in order to directly recognize its already present state of emptiness or primordial wisdom. I think it's Joey's turn here for number 10.
Reading 10. The motto here is bring everything to the path. Nothing, absolutely nothing, is taboo. Food, alcohol, sex, money, all are to be deeply befriended and lovingly embraced, within, of course, sane limits. As being ornaments of spirit itself, direct manifestations of the ultimate divine, there is only spirit. And all of this because the sacred and profane, the infinite and finite, nirvana and samsara, emptiness and form are not two different, separate, fragmented realms, but co-arising, mutually existing, complementary aspects of one whole reality, equally to be embraced and cherished.
That's a lot to take in, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's fairly revolutionary. Okay, I presume there will be questions about this, but I think it would be better just to finish off the talk and then come to them as a group. So what would a fourth or a fifth turning need to include? I want to identify the 5 key features of integral religion that Wilber has brought forward. Wilber wrote a foreword for his student Dustin DePerna's 2018 book called Evolution's Ally, Our World's Religious Traditions as Conveyor Belts of Transformation, in which he enumerates 5 key ideas contained within integral spirituality. There they are. Quadrants, levels, lines, states, and types. We're going to explain these in some detail in the next several classes. This is really the heart of everything Wilber has put forward. So for now, it's important to understand that Wilber claims that every human being in the world possesses all 5 of these major elements. Therefore, if you want to have a truly comprehensive and inclusive picture of any person or event, you will need to include all 5 of these elements. He also asserts that the same holds for religion and spirituality. They also possess all 5 elements or dimensions. By the way, Wilber usually refers to the more exterior institutional aspects of the religions as religion, while the more interior aspects are designated by the term spirituality. As we will see in future classes, 2 of the most important elements in this list are structures and states, actually levels and states. The terms are equivalent. Sorry, I didn't change my note. So here are a listing. It's not a complete list in the case of structures, but the 5 types of structures that most people on the planet today are operating with in their brains. And then the states of consciousness. The gross is the waking state. The subtle is the dreaming state. Causal is deep dreaming. The witness is something else, and non-duality is probably what we would call nirvana. So we'll have an entire class on states of consciousness and another one on structures of consciousness. These are quite deep topics for him. So let's just talk briefly about the structures. Research has shown that every religious tradition, its main theories, dogmas, or dharmas, as well as its major practices, grow and develop through at least 5 major levels of consciousness or levels of complexity. So the 5 main levels or structures are, again, magic, mythic, rational, pluralistic, and integral. And you can see that Wilbur's point about most of the West having a mythic type of religion makes it obsolete when most people are living at the rational or pluralistic level. They can't accept the limitations of a mythic version of religion. Now, in terms of states of consciousness, there are 5 major states of consciousness that human beings experience on a daily basis. That's the gross, the subtle, causal, witness, and non-duality. Most of us can't really call them stages of consciousness. Other than the gross state, we are mostly unconscious while we proceed through the other 4 states. So why is that? In their West, there is very little information available concerning the stages of meditation and what it gives us access to. According to current conventional Western developmental models, states like waking, dreaming, and deep sleep are temporary. Modern researchers don't believe that it's possible to establish a permanent vantage point that brings full waking awareness into each of these 5 states on an ongoing basis. Lisa, could you read number 11, please?
Sure. Most Western researchers are only vaguely aware of the truly infinite dimensions of the observing self. They are often aware of it, but not to the extent that self can be realized. And most are even more unaware of the degree of extraordinary liberation or freedom that can be realized. And virtually nothing is known of non-dual suchness as vantage point.
Okay, so there. That's why we don't know anything about them. So why don't they know more about these natural states? Wilbur explains that waking, dreaming, and deep sleep don't turn into what he calls vantage points except through training. In other words, if we want solid evidence of this domain of state development, we have to turn to the world's great wisdom traditions. These wisdom traditions have maintained lineages over long periods of time that preserve knowledge about how to transform ourselves. Every human being thus has a dual center of gravity at every point in their lives. They have a structure center at the magic, mythic, rational, pluralistic, or integral level. And at the same time, they have a state center in the gross, subtle, causal, witness, or non-dual state. The combination of these two is what he calls their cosmic address. So we will have much more to say about these new terms in coming classes. The last thing I want to talk about is 2 dimensions of religion. Structures and states are thus 2 very different dimensions that we need to, or that we tend to work through as human beings. Naturally, we want to make sure that all religions are helping us to evolve through both dimensions. This means that they will need to encourage us to develop through as many levels of consciousness as possible. They need to continue to assist us to be familiar with a magic Jesus and a mythic Jesus. but they also need to introduce us to a rational Jesus, a pluralistic Jesus, even an integral Jesus. On top of that, though the religions ought to be urging us to explore the full range of states of consciousness, gross, subtle, causal, witness, and non-dual. The Eastern religious traditions have much to offer the world in this field. There are also special historical individuals in the Western traditions who can guide us in expanding our state-specific capacities. And the final reading goes to Ingrid Hauk.
Great. Okay. Reading 12. In an integral approach, we want to make sure that the religious traditions have a full and complete development in spiritual intelligence and a robust path to introduce states of consciousness as they progress through vantage points. With an integral orientation to spirituality or religion, neither of these can be left out, and both need to be pursued.
Okay, thank you. So Wilbur is certain that the world is on a path towards what he calls trans-lineage, universal spirituality. We might think of it as a grand synthesis of the best of the world's religions, as they help humanity to develop its dual centers of gravity to the greatest possible extent, all the while adhering to the Baha'i principle of unity and diversity. Many of the traditions have well-established meditative paths to true spiritual awakening that they can share with those which do not. This will, quote, help ensure that the world our children inherit will be more whole, more loving, and more integral than ever before. So, I'll stop sharing. And we can start talking. You've been very patient. The only chat item I've seen was from Linda O'Neill. Thanks very much, Mark. I prefer this approach. Yay. I made one person happy. Okay, so I've thrown quite a bit at you tonight about evolution in religion. Are there any sticking points that you're having trouble with at the moment?
Mark Harold has his hand up.
Okay, Harold.
Yeah, well, there were several sticking points for me, but also a lot of, illuminating points. I want to go back to that distinction between esotericism and exotericism.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a quote from Krishna. Krishna was an avatar who lived in the most hierarchical society ever. And if anyone was going to talk about, religion for the elite and religion for the middle class and middle for the lower class, it would have been him. But here's what he said. All those who take refuge in me, Krishna, the avatar, whatever their birth, race, sex, or caste, will attain the supreme goal. This realization can be attained even by those whom society scorns. That last phrase means the outcasts, the bottom of the barrel, right?
Yep.
People, okay. So in other words, I guess what I'm saying is, I don't think that the founders or the manifestations of God made the distinction between esoteric and exoteric. They were trying to save the whole world. So the distinction between esoteric and exoteric was made by human beings who I think had ego problems and wanted to separate the elite from everybody else. So I guess I'm challenging that assumption. You said it as if it were universal, that there's always going to be an elite and there's always going to be an exoteric. When I look at the actual teachings of the founders of faith, they didn't make such a distinction. So they're implying that even those uneducated, right, the lower castes can be saved, can be realized, can attain to the highest throne or threshold of consciousness. Okay, so anyway, so that's one thing. I'll say more later, but I got to save time for other people's responses.
Well, in my own defense, I have to say that what I'm doing is reporting as accurately as I can what Wilbur is putting on paper. So I'm not necessarily 100% in favor of everything he says. And I understand your point of view on this. But at the same time, I also am aware of the fact that in Buddhism, for instance, the Buddha changed what he had to say, apparently, from one audience to another, depending on their level of receptivity. So, and one of the things that we talked about last time was that the three turnings seem to have appeared at much later dates, but in fact were introduced by the Buddha during his own lifetime in discussions that he had with people who had already become monks and were living according to his teachings as best they could at that point. So they were given teachings which were not of interest to people who were just working in shops or in the government or whatever, in the military, et cetera, at that time. So there was a distinction. And in the same thing appears in Jesus's case. There were certain things that he mentioned to the apostles that they then were to mention to the people that they were talking to, presumably using the same kind of wisdom that Baha'u'llah asks us to use, so that you're addressing people appropriately, not speaking over their heads, just, anyway, I'll see. I don't know how you're going to respond to that, but anyway, Jack, you can take it away next.
Yeah, well, I was just going to listen more tonight, but the only reason I'm commenting now is because I want to clarify something that Harold said and the way that Mark presented the exoteric and the esoteric. I think there's a misunderstanding going on here. My understanding of these two categories, I got from Houston Smith, the great comparative religionist, and Frithjof Schuon in his book, The Transcendent Unity of Religions. And there are two levels. The exoteric would be the outward practices of the religion, the rites, the rituals, the prayers, whatever the ceremonies would be. And the esoteric would be the mystic heart of the religions. And so it's the esoteric in these writers. I don't know if this is Wilbur's view, but I adhere to this view. It's the esoteric or mystical heart of the religions that they have in common. So that's where they're not only their ethical teachings are not contradictory, but their mystical experiences don't really contradict one another. This is the deeper heart of religion. So the esoteric is the common bond between the great world faiths. That's how I understood the esoteric and the exoteric. And the esoteric, or the deeper mystical heart, was seen, if you like, to be a deeper form of religious experience than just the outward practices of the faith. So maybe that's my understanding of those two categories. Maybe there's a lot more to that than I'm aware of, but that's how I understood it in Frithjof Schuon and
Mhm.
The Transcendent Unity of Religions in Houston Smith. So maybe that's helpful in some sense. I don't know.
Harold, do you want to come back on that?
No, that's yeah, Jack is trying to round out the meaning of esotericism so that it includes the mystical heart of all faiths. Yeah, that's less divisive, I think, to put it that way.
Mhm.
I think I'm also responding from another angle. You know, if you think of religion as a whole, spiritual growth is like one dimension of what the founders of religions were trying to bring about. They were trying to generate a whole new civilization. So the ethical teachings and the new rituals, or abrogating old rituals, and the social principles, all of that, and the interest in learning or advancing or growing or justice or any, you know, all the virtues, that was building a whole new civilization. Spiritual growth is one of those dimensions, not all.
No.
To say that it's the most important, you have to be very careful. Then are you saying it's more important than ethics? Is spirituality more important than morality? It seems to me Baha'u'llah straightens all of this out in the 7 valleys. Mystics are not exempt from the law. They're not exempt from ethics, right? So, and they're not exempt from the rest of the goal of religion, to elevate all of humanity, not just those with higher consciousness. Anyway, so yeah, that's what I would say again. That Baha'u'llah, I think, you know, reforms mystical consciousness, what it's about, how it fits with other aspects of building an ever-advancing civilization.
Okay. So I see that there's an interesting comment. I'm not sure if it's David or Belinda who made it, but it came from their computer, saying that perhaps a good example of esoteric versus esoteric is the Surah of Rum in the Quran. So did you want to expand on that a little bit, David? Because I see Belinda pointing at you. And then we'll come back to Sai.
Okay, yeah. Because I mean, Abdul Baha gives quite an exposition of the esoteric meaning of the Surah of Rum.
Yep.
Whereas the actual, I mean, in the Quran itself, the actual, you know, fight or battle, you know, between the two forces, and then one wins and the other loses, and then the other, and then one lost wins again, and so on. And that's an exoteric
Interpretation.
It's an exoteric thing, you know. It's on the surface, but Al-Baha goes into a detailed explanation of the true meaning of that incident.
That's right.
And that's esoteric.
In fact, there were 9 levels of esotericism that he introduced in that. And
Yeah,
he said there were further ones he could have introduced, but didn't.
Yeah.
And the one of them, I think it was the 9th one, was the one that this course is built around, which is his explanation of the stages of the soul.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why we focused on that particular interpretation of his. But you're right, there were several esoteric versions or interpretations that he offered us, which we didn't spend a lot of time on, to tell you the truth. Okay, Sai, I see your glasses are glinting at me.
Yeah, I'm like Jack. I wasn't going to say anything, but I couldn't hold back.
Please go ahead.
No, I just wanted to throw in a timeline. It might help because when you, about halfway through, when you said religion is losing, there's been a loss of faith in the whole world, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
The timeline is important because 1867, James Clerk Maxwell published his papers on electromagnetism. We all know what else happened in the 1860s. And that was that really changed the whole world. In fact, that's what Einstein said. He said Maxwell was, he believed, like he stood on his shoulders. Anyway, so I wanted to point that out, that when you say there's a waning, because when I grew up, born a baby boomer, you know, after this big war, we grew up with science, knew everything. And religion was over there, and we heard about it. There was catechism. I thought, what is that? And all this stuff happening in the background. But, you know, there was Sunday school, all this stuff, but science took over. If you had any questions, you wouldn't turn to the church to ask, what is that? You turn to science. I just want to throw that in. That really affected my whole life and my whole generation. So.
Do you think we lost anything because of that emphasis?
No, science, like we lost the, I guess the unity. I don't want to get into the whole church and state debate, but if the church would have went along with science instead of kind of saying, well, you know, fight, or they resisted, I think in the beginning, way back. If they would have maybe taken science along somehow, but it was a battle right from the beginning, and it's still going on, right? You can't talk to an atheist because they just start talking science. I've got atheist friends, but it's a waste of time.
Well, that makes the whole issue of science and religion as presented by the Baha'i Faith quite refreshing.
Yes,
it's somehow or other, I mean, they're making it a major principle that these two have to work together. They have to listen to each other.
And they actually
and
do.
incorporate.
They actually do. It's just if you look at William Hatcher, try to understand some of his stuff. He joined them, but to try to understand what he did it's so deep. That book he's got, it's called Minimalism. I don't know if you've gone through it, but
I haven't actually.
It's tough, but you can get through it because he turns it all into mathematics. But
my favorite subject. I'm so good
anyway,
at it. Yeah.
You can go on, but he knew it's kind of, I mean, it seems like he knew what's going on, but he's a lot more, he's got a lot more, let's say, capacity than I do. Knowledge.
Well, it's good to be stretching yourself. Okay, folks, what else did you like to, how would you like to respond to what I talked about? Do you think there's any use in that distinction between relative truth and absolute truth, for instance, or what else did we talk about?
Where did this come up?
I don't know. No, I think we should go on.
What did you think about the idea of Tantra? Oh, I'm not looking up. I beg your pardon, Heather, and then Meryl. You need to turn yourself on there, Heather.
I think too is that a great thing about this course is it gives us vocabulary to even think about these things. Because if you don't have the vocabulary, if you don't have the language, it's just hard to think it through in your head. And that also relates to my, at least my time with young people, is that many young people outside of the Baha'i faith do not have any vocabulary of religion at all. Their vocabulary, they don't know religious history, and they don't know religious vocabulary. We talked about mythic figures. They don't know the stories of the Bible. They don't know that. It's gone. You know, even if you went to Sunday school and didn't listen, at least you had some background and some vocabulary and some stories and some hymns that told you things. but that is secularism and consumerism and materialism has taken over people's minds to the extent that they don't even know that that vocabulary is there, I believe.
So what are the terms that struck you tonight from the discussion that you think would be useful in terms of vocabulary?
Just the idea of integral, what is it? Integral spirituality, and the thing with the ocean and wetness and everything is wet, but you know what I mean? But even though there's the different waves, and just thinking about what is emptiness, and also thinking about Buddhism and how that, you know, you can be doing two things at once. You can be working towards nirvana, but you're also bringing into it, what is it? It's in the Bodhi Sutra. You can do both. Samara and enlightenment are parts of the same thing. Just to be able to have the words to think about those things.
Okay, I think you're right that this is expanding our vocabularies. I mean, we're borrowing terms from other religions, but hey, it's all one religion. So
yeah,
I don't feel guilty about doing that. So it's useful. I'm very happy. Okay, Meryl.
Two things. One is I was raised in a secular atheist scientific family.
Oh.
And I didn't meet religious people until I was 21. And they were really living their religion. They were Christians. And they were really experiencing it. And that moved me. So, which leads to my second point. There's a book called The Master and His Emissary. Does anybody know it?
Yes.
And so the left brain works with concepts, rational thinking, everything's named, categorized, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
The right brain is more intuitive. It's more your lived embodied experience. And it sends the left brain out as its emissary to understand things. And the emissary is meant to come back in the service of lived embodied reality. And he looks at the whole history of Western world in terms of when the emissary set itself up as its own master. And so then moving from there, in the right brain, you have the more intuitive side, you have the metaphorical, the storytelling capacity, the mythic, the symbolic capacity. So these rituals, if they're being lived, like I've been in indigenous rituals where it's really being lived, just like when I met those Christians in Newfoundland, I felt like these people are really, the ritual is helping people get to center. Is this making sense so far?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay, so in other words, I forget which turning it was. I think it was the second when you had the conceptual side, and then you had the waves in the ocean. And to me, that's what's happened with us in the West. We've gotten a bit too into just the conceptual and really removed from embodied and removed from how ritual really works. Like I've been in the Christian communion where it really, you can feel, it's doing something. And but a lot of religions, I think they get sort of dried out around the edges. So you need to find that moisture, like you need to find the center again. Like
That's nice. I like the way you're putting that. Yeah. They need to dive in the ocean again.
Yeah, exactly. And here Jung comes in,
Mhm.
because Jung, and looking at all the role of that realm, the metaphorical realm, like I've studied expressive arts, and it talks a lot about the metaphor, like these how do I put it, all these myths, they or Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey, not the way it's used in the entertainment industry,
Mhm.
but the way it talks about the actual journey of the person growing up and listening to the messages from the soul that come from deep within,
Mhm.
telling them, hey, wake up, wake up, wake up. Like, don't just be involved with your ego.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So in other words, like myth, I have trouble when you label myth as, or I guess it's Wilbur who labeled myth as a second level. I mean, to me, they're all needed. Like if I'm talking to an atheist, I'll just say, oh, symbolically speaking, blah, 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 and then they'll accept it maybe.
Well, you have to remember though with Wilbur that he's transcending and including all of these. So he's never throwing
Oh, right.
away mythic thinking.
Oh,
What
good.
he's saying is that it is part of a larger whole.
Okay.
So you're embracing it. You're not dismissing it.
Oh, thank you. That helps. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you made some good points. I like that with the wetness. That was great. Anyway, okay, Alan, you're next, and then David or Belinda. I'm not sure which. So, Alan, go ahead.
Yeah. So when I join in conversations like this, it seems to me that it's very much like Heather has suggested, that our vocabulary is what guides us. If we haven't got words to talk about it, we don't have a way of communicating. And if we don't have a way of communicating, then we don't talk about it.
Mhm.
So we get ourselves, we live in a world that's built of words and concepts. And often I think we miss that point, that if we were living at a different time, our words and our concepts would be different. If we lived in a different culture, our words and concepts would be different. So we'd be swimming in a different ocean. And this is important because for two reasons. One, it's very clear from what Abdu'l-Baha said, truth is one. And if truth is one, and we have all these different words and concepts, and they seem to be in conflict with each other, well, it's only because we don't have the correct words and concepts yet in our own particular lives. And that goes back to what is the nature of this reality of the universe. And my limited understanding of the Big Bang Theory is basically that there was nothing, and then nothing took on a form and a force. And this form and force are the two different elements that are one and yet have separated and become this universe. And if you think about nothing becoming the universe as we understand it, and we understand that there's both form and force, then I think it tells us that there is something underlying what we see that is beyond our experience. And in a sense, I hold that is the divine, if you will. And both force and form are expression of the single truth of the divine. And our life through these words and these concepts is designed to bring us to a deeper knowledge of the form and force of the divine. I hope that makes some sense to anybody. Because it gives direction to purpose and purpose in life, for purpose for humanity. And having the direction gives us a capacity to move forward instead of backwards, because we know where forward is. Sorry.
And well, you shouldn't apologize. That was great. And one of the things about a direction is that it promotes new experiences. And often there are characteristics of that new experience which you don't have the vocabulary for. So you go searching for it. So that prompts the development of language that is subtle enough to be able to handle these new experiences that you're having. So having a direction, having that forward motion is an excellent way to evolve. You may not be able to do it by yourself, but I mean, in communication with other people, as we together here are struggling with acquiring a vocabulary that is useful, together we can do it. But, you know, why not make use of some of the vocabulary that already exists in the world, because it's part of our heritage. And maybe we're not going to use the exact Sanskrit term, but maybe we'll use an English term that refers in some way back to that. Anyway, good ideas. Okay, David.
Yeah. Well, I agree with Alan very much, and I just want to because this business of science and religion, and in some answered questions, there's this chapter number 40 called "The Knowledge of the Divine Manifestations," and Abdu'l-Baha gives a very different definition of what religion is from what we are used to. And I would just like, if you don't mind, I'd like to just to read not the whole chapter, but just an excerpt from the whole thing. He says, "The universal manifestations of God are aware of the truths underlying the mysteries of all created things, and thus they found a religion that is based upon and consonant with the prevailing condition of humanity. For religion consists in the necessary relationships deriving from the realities of things. If the manifestation of God, the divine lawgiver, were not informed of the realities of things, if he did not understand the necessary relationships deriving from these realities, he would assuredly be incapable of establishing a religion consonant with the needs and conditions of the time."
Mm-hmm.
Oh. And then it goes on there about the master of being a skilled physician, which is an example of what he means. And so
he's talking about being relevant, I guess. Eh?
Yeah.
Nothing like relevance.
Yeah. He refers to the physician being a healer, and then the divine physician, which is manifestation.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing. So he says, religion consists, it's the last paragraph. Religion consists in the necessary relationships deriving from the reality of things, universal manifestations of God, being aware of the mysteries of creation, are fully informed of these necessary relationships and establish them as the religion of God. So that's, I think, another conception, another way of looking at what religion is. And from there, I wrote sometime back a bit of an essay based on this, and I was concerned about like religion and religion and science, and so to me, what Abdu'l-Baha has been doing here is, in a sense, giving the essence of what we have come to call the scientific method really is. So that, scientists, whether physicists, biologists, whatever, and they're working on, on the world, on the universe, and so on and so forth. They're actually participating in the religion of God in their own way.
Yeah.
They're being spiritual in their own way.
Yeah. Well, it's helpful to us to recognize that, I think.
Yeah.
Instead of, taking up a confrontational outlook on them. Okay. I guess it's Hangame's turn and then Bill's.
Hi. I just wanted to understand this the concept which says when emptiness and form are truly seen as to be one. I was trying to kind of wrap my head around that to say, like, what do they really mean here, or what does he mean? Something that came to my mind, I'll just share that. Is it like the seen and the unseen? Possibly. I just wanted to kind of ask that question. Thank you.
Well, that's a tough question. Well, the problem
Take
is
a crack at that later, Mark, if you don't mind.
you're going to take one. Okay. But
After Bill.
I'm just going to say that one part of that duality, emptiness, is something that you can't conceive. You just have to accept that. I mean, you have to have lived it in order to be able to get to that point. That's where the real problem lies. We can get a handle on the form side of things and how it's evolved and how we need to keep up with it. But you have to actually experience the emptiness in a way that is impossible to talk about. I mean, Wilbur does a fantastic job of pointing us in the direction of it, but your experience is going to be different when you have it. And so until you're deeply immersed in those experiences, you're not really going to see what he's talking about by these two being two sides of the same thing. Sorry. I hate to be so difficult, but that's my sense of it. Okay, Bill, you had your hand up and then you took it down. Why would that be?
Well, because I wanted to hear what Jack had to say in answer to Henry's question, because
okay, and then we'll come back to you.
It's getting late, so I don't have anything earth-shattering.
Well, let's see what Jack has to say first.
Well, it's just a commonsensical observation that form and emptiness are polarities. Emptiness has no form, and form is form. Form is structure. So what I think this text is talking about is is, and Mark, you alluded to it in your response, is that you have a spiritual experience. And here again, we're missing the words, which kind of spiritual experience are we talking about, in which you transcend these categories of structure or form and emptiness. You're looking beyond that. So shunyata, or emptiness, is actually a form of perception. But Mark, I wanted to challenge, I think Wilber's gone too far with this idea of overcoming duality. And, Buddhism to me as a world religion presents the most challenging concepts of all, especially to those of us in the West. And you had a lot of those concepts today, and they're very, very difficult because the Western mind is not used to thinking in these categories at all.
Mhm.
And when Wilber alluded to in one of the readings tonight, putting the sinful acts, the meat, the alcohol, the sexual intercourse, and all that stuff, on the same level as everything else. He's trying to overcome this duality, but in my view, it's rather dangerous, because the ethical prescriptions are normally, you don't mix these things. You don't look upon what is forbidden as a means to find the transcendent, which is, it seems to me, what Wilber seems to be indicating there. He's trying to erase the distinction between haram and halal, permitted and forbidden, and saying that they disappear in some higher level. Well, I'm with Harold on this one, that the ethical dimension is part and parcel of religion. And it is interesting to me how the great mystics, in whatever tradition they're in, who emphasize the spiritual consciousness and so on, and all these higher mystical states, they don't talk about ethics a great deal. And it's the same thing with the New Age people. They don't discuss to any great extent ethics, ethical concerns, laws, what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. It's all about your spiritual consciousness. And it seems to me that this is,
I don't know what he's talking.
a great lack of this whole approach. When the line is erased between the ethical and the non-ethical, I don't know.
Well, Jack, you're
if I'm reading that right, but
you're not taking into account the fact that from day one of a Buddhist life, they're being indoctrinated into a huge list of ethical precepts from the earliest stages of Buddhism right through. That forms the backbone of how a Buddhist is shaped. So we're not focusing on that because these guys are talking about, they're assuming that you've already got an excellent handle on all of those things. You would never do any of those. So these are insights that are given to fully matured human beings who have questions as to, why do I have anger? Well, what is it? So when you have dipped into non-dual awareness and apply it to that particular question, then you're able to see the real truth behind it. So it's
Yeah, I
not
agree.
encouraging you to
Yeah.
be angry. It's just saying, this is a reality. This is something that all human beings have to some extent. Why is it there? What is the purpose of it?
Mhm.
And so this perspective, non-perspective, allows you to intuit the real truth behind that urge that everybody has.
Oh, I see what you mean, but
Yeah.
yeah, but when I read the quote that you had tonight, I understand it better now in the way that you explained it, but he was saying that the divine could be attained equally well by through the forbidden, through the haram, and that sort of runs counter to everything that we believe. But you're explaining it in a way that makes sense if you look deeper to find, for example, why these commandments would be there in the first place.
Yeah. So think of Baha'u'llah's statement about let your vision be all embracing or world embracing.
Mhm.
That means totally inclusive. So that means you've got to figure out what's happening with anger. If you're ever going to solve the problems between all these angry people, you've got to figure out what anger is about and help other people to evolve their understanding of it. See what I'm saying?
Yes.
Mary, what are you going to say?
Excellent.
Okay, that's great.
Excellent.
Give you a thumbs up.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's the problem of interpreting these texts, you read them and then,
Well, and it's also a problem caused by the fact that I'm distilling an 800-page book into 14 or 15 pages of my text, right? So I'm being selective. I'm leaving things out, which is driving me crazy. So it's an artificial view of what Wilbur really stands for. Really, all it is a prompt to go out and read them yourself. Because he's got a tremendous amount of things to say that are worthwhile listening to. Above and beyond what I've talked about. I'm constantly having to decide, what can I actually focus on? What do I have to leave aside?
Yeah, well, I think I'd have to say one more thing.
So anyway, folks, I hope I haven't disturbed you in any deep way.
No.
Given you food for thought.
Yes. Thank you.
So shall we say good night?
Thank you so much.
See you in a week.
Yes.
Thank you, Mark. See you later, friends.
Take care of yourselves. Enjoy the freezing rain.
Have a nice Thursday.
I talk to you later on.